Our final guest speaker today is the National Lead for Performance Analysis at the England and Wales Cricket Board. He also has experience with elite athletes, has delivered coaching education to a vast array of sports, and is currently completing his PhD. Please welcome Michael Bourne.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Phil, in particular, for inviting me to come and speak. It's an honour to be able to speak to you guys and to represent my organisation in this forum today. I'm going to go without the microphone because I think everyone's had enough of the cricket. So if you can't, I'm going to try and project. If you can't hear me, just say so, and we can move to that. But hopefully, we'll be okay. And really, this presentation or this talk came from a conversation I had with Phil a couple of months ago, really, where we were discussing how we work our department and how we try and use performance analysis and analytics to push forward the England cricket team performances across the pathway. Our department actually works with the men's and women's pathways, both of which for a period of time have been the most successful in the world. And within those pathways we have junior programs, we have the senior men's and women's programs. So we're constantly looking at how we can take the whole department, the whole cricket performance department forward. And I wanted to start with this picture. And Marco, for somebody who doesn't understand why we love beating Aussies so much, that's a picture of what happens when you beat Aussies and you haven't beaten them for a long period of time. Okay? So this was actually before my time. This was in 2005 when the men won the Ashes. And for most of you who know cricket, that wasn't a common occurrence. Beating the Australians in the Ashes wasn't a thing that happened very often to the England Wales cricket team. And not only for those inside the organisation, but for the nation as a whole. I think the ECB at that time realised how much it meant to everyone else in the country what those 11 men or 11 women they sent out into the field did. And actually what we forget is that the women at the same time won their version of the Ashes. And what's this become for us? This has become our challenge essentially. Our mission statement within the organisation is to inspire the nation by winning games of cricket. The organisation has realised that is a great mission for us to have, not just to go out and try and win a game of cricket here or there, but to recreate these types of situations. So when we're tasked with building the performance analysis department, building the physiology S&C department, we're always heading back to this concept that our leader, Hugh Morris, says we need to create a situation where we can inspire the nation as we have done here. So that's our challenge, that's what we're trying to achieve within our department. Now for us, being scientists, being analysts, that's a fairly nebulous aim. You know, in reality, when I'm working day to day, I don't think about the inspiring the nation side of it. That's not what inspires me, that's not what drives us every day. We know that's the aim, but we know that the way to do that is to win games of cricket, and our expertise is aimed more towards that concept. How can we go about winning games of cricket? So within the department, and I think it's important that I stress that this is a departmental thing, so I am the nominal lead for that department, but we actually have two analysts who work solely with the England team, Nathan Lehman and Gemma Broad. We have two analysts in the office, Mike Mustone and Liam Sanders, who do a high majority of the actual generation of analytics data. We have part-timers, some coaches, some not, working with the other teams, the England Women's team, the England Women's Academy, the Under-19s team. And we actually have a broad range of consultants who, for tasks where we don't have the expertise in-house, we've gone out and they've found solutions or they've generated data for us, which helps us meet our aim. So one example, the guys from Sheffield Hallam here, in various different guides have had a lot of impact into the performance analysis that we do on a day-to-day basis in terms of hitting our aims. And our department focus is really around this, to find win potential using data, technology and analysis. And in some ways I focus quite a lot on semantics when we set things like goals and objectives, but for me that's massively important. Because the first part of that statement, find win potential, is absolutely what drives us every day in that department. So when we're having a discussion about an idea or a concept or what we're going to look for and how we're going to move forward, that's what we come back to. Even the most nebulous thing we do, we're always trying to relate it back to, right, how is that going to end up somewhere along the line as win potential for that particular team. And a lot of this conference has been about the concept of metrics, generating metrics within different sports, understanding the sport. And I actually think that the situation we work in now, the metrics are some of the easiest things to come by. So one example I put up here, there is an online blog now called Crickmetric. Anybody who likes cricket can go and have a look. And they're generating equations such as this. It's actually run by two MIT students. One is a PhD student in finance, and he looks at financial risk. And the other is a former PhD student at MIT. He now works in analytics for Amazon. In their spare time, because they have a passion for cricket, they apply their skills to looking at the game of cricket, generating metrics, generating ways of understanding how the game is played and how people contribute to that particular game. So this is just looking at a runs above average calculation. So if I send out Kevin Peterson, say, how many runs above the average player who would play in his position will he likely generate? And then they would use this to look at the contribution to wins for that particular individual. Now, I don't necessarily endorse this as the one and only way that you can actually generate this calculation. I'm using that to outline the fact that this, alongside many other types of metric, are available just by putting in a very simple web address. So you can spend a lot of time going out and trying to find high-level analytical capability. I think that's going to drive your organisation forward. One thing we always try and do is say, well, what's out there first? So for our research strategy, it works exactly the same. Don't spend time researching and do what someone else has done. Take 5 minutes and go and find it in your library or online or somewhere else. Learn from it, and then build off the back of that. This is just another article on their particular website, looking at crowdsourcing player rankings is another idea. Rather than you constantly generating new iterations of ways of ranking players, they want to go out and source the cricket community, see what they think, see how that matches up to what they're generating in terms of their metrics. So again, just keep in mind that the concept of metrics, which we place a lot of emphasis on in terms of generating and going out and finding high-level individuals to do that, is actually out there already, and there's a lot of things that we can pick off. I think on top of that, for me in sport, modelling has always been a very important part of the process. You have to have some way of understanding and comparing what we're looking at. So this is just an example of when I worked for the EIS a number of years ago, how we used to model our own play and some of our opposition. And we were able to use a deterministic process that I took from my days as a biomechanist, where we would look at our players, we would map their strengths and weaknesses, but we would do it in a sequential manner. So a judo fight would generally go, and if Dave's still there, probably pull me up, but we would generally go out there, you would start the fight, you'd look for a grip. Each player would have their general strengths and weaknesses in that particular area. So what we've done is we would highlight for our particular players where their strength areas are. We would then model off the back of that which techniques they would generally use. Greens were ones that they would score with at world competitions. Ambers were ones that they were trying, weren't scoring at world competitions, but maybe were scoring domestically. Reds were development, focusing on Olympic Games and so on. And we would just use these to map and track players' development, players' performances over time. Again, not to get too much into this, just to say that actually this is one example of work that we've done and other people in here have done, looking at how you actually go about modelling performance within players. More recently, something that we're looking at is taking the cricket data, and you can't see it's not too clear here, but essentially what we've got here is an ability to compare statistical data for a player, to be able to compare coach ratings maybe of a player, and to be able to compare scouting data of a player, and building ways where actually we can take all this data, all these metrics, and easily display them and start to compare and model where players are at relative to the goals that we set for them. So, as many organisations would use the traffic light system that's displayed here, is simply set against benchmarks which are set within the organisation. So our national league will determine that if there's a measure of physical here for a fast bowler, this is the standard you need to hit to be an international fast bowler. If you hit that standard, your lights are green automatically. So very simplistic, it's nothing fancy, but again it's to highlight that point that in terms of the metrics, they're out there. If not, we know we can get the expertise from people as long as they've got the data. And one thing cricket isn't short of is data. we can generate the metrics we need. We've got the capabilities and the ways of actually going about modelling, comparing, contrasting players. So we've got the basis of a very good performance analysis capability. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about ourselves in cricket, I'm talking about us as a general community. I'm lucky enough to know analysts and sports scientists working across a lot of sports. And many of the trends I'm talking about and reflecting upon now refer to myself and my experience, but also refer to what I see within the industry as well. I think where we start getting a little bit shaky, and we historically have done this, and it shapes the way we work now, and I also think across the organisations generally, is a transfer. So we generate information, we generate metrics, we generate models, but remember at the start of the presentation we were talking about winning matches, inspiring a nation. So there has to be a transfer somewhere along the line of a metric or a model into reality, into winning on the field. And I think someone touched the point before, it might have been Dave, I'm not sure, but that is probably one of the hardest things I think to happen, and often it's the most neglected. And I've learned this in some very hard ways over my career. So I went to the Olympic Games in 2008 with judo, and we'd been through a process whereby we had the models for our athletes. We knew where their strengths were, where they needed to be. We went through a process over a number of probably 2 years of actually monitoring what the players were like to qualify, what their strengths and weaknesses were, how people beat them, how they won matches. And I think we went into the games for the first time ever in GB Judo. We had some form of profile for every possible opposition who was in that draw, and we had a method of delivering that information to the coaches and to the athletes prior to the games and during the games if needs be, to hopefully try and shape their strategies. And what I learned there, which is the reality for all of us, is just because we know it, and just because that information is stored somewhere, does not mean it will turn into a behaviour which ultimately impacts upon winning performances. So we went into that stadium for 8 days. For pretty much 8 days we watched GB athletes lose fights, and they would lose in the ways that we knew they were likely to lose those matches. And that is a very hard process to go through when you believe you have information or knowledge that can help somebody achieve their goals, and in doing that achieve the organisational goals. And let's be honest, for most of us, we're here for the reasons that we want to help people win. Be it the Olympic level, be it in cricket, football, rugby, most of us like to be here for winning, and that's the impact we want to have. So for me, this experience very much shaped how, as a leader of performance analysis, I go about business now, and how we set our goals and our expectations. I've been to this conference last year, and I went to the MIT conference last year also. And since the film's come out, I know there's been a lot of talk around this concept of Moneyball, the book of Moneyball, the Moneyball process. I would say for me, this book has been much more influential on how I go about my business than Moneyball. Moneyball is very interesting and has been influential, but this actually highlighted something to me in print, which the previous experience showed me in an experiential manner. And that was that we talk about analytics quite a lot in sport now. It's become a very popular concept, but actually there's very different levels of working. And a lot of us don't necessarily work at the level we either aspire to work or we believe we actually work at. And it comes down to that concept of transferring data into behaviours. So within the book, they outline this table, and they call it the competing on analytics stages model. So if you're going to be competitive using analytics, there are a number of different levels you can operate at. I'll not go through all the information, I'll just outline a few points. There's your negligible, flying blind. I know from conversations with Marco, there's a lot of sports out there that he's experienced who operate at that level. They have no idea analytically how their sport runs, where they fit, what they can do going forward. And it progresses through localized analytics. I would suggest that a lot of us work in a localized analytics manner, somewhere between levels 2 and 3. Whereas if you sit in a sport, your department, be it 3 performance analysts, 2 performance analysts, have this aspiration to use data to drive decisions, to move people forward. Once you step outside the door of your office, the coaching staff, the physical staff, the leaders in that organisation don't share that type of vision or that use of data. If that's where your organisation is, That's not a negative, but I think if your aspiration is to move forward, and if our aspiration is to move forward, we need to be clear about where we're operating upon this scale. Once you get to level 4, you've got this enterprise-wide perspective, you're able to use analytics for some advantage, and you know what you want to do and how to get to the next level, but you're not quite there. And the title of the presentation, which we hold in our heads, and we often talk about, but let's be honest, not many, if any of us actually operate there, this concept of level 5 analytics. Enterprise-wide, big results, sustainable advantage over time, which is driven by data. The reality is, no matter how good it looks outside, the ECB is not a level 5 organisation. I think at best, on our best days, we would hit level 4, we'd probably bump somewhere between the two. So our aim is to try and push forward as much as possible, taking into account that we are not an Amazon and everything we do can't be driven by hardcore data, but where we can actually use analytics for improving our win potential and capabilities, we're looking to find those advantages. So for me, I think about it as a simple model because I think in various model-based terms. This is the analysis, and for all of us, when we generate analysis of a sport, that's what we generate, a model of that sport. And we do that quite well, as I've said, we've got the metrics to be able to do so. But then there's a reality, there is the real world behaviours. And where we want to work, where we're always pushing and fighting, is this in the middle, the analytical filter. That process allows you to change a model into a real world behaviour. And for us as a department, we believe that's where our competitive advantage sits. Not in the generation of the metrics. I mean, we have great capabilities, as I've said, to draw upon to do that. We've got externals like Sheffield Hallam University. We've done projects with UCL. One of our analysts is a if I ever said that in front of him, he'd probably try and cut my head off. He's a Cambridge maths graduate. And he has very high capabilities in statistical analysis, mathematical modelling. But we know that Australian cricket, South African cricket could go somewhere and find that capability. It was outlined today, there's people sending letters wanting to work for Arsenal for free with these capabilities, just because they want to get in the industry. I think for me, at the MIT conference last year, that was one of the strong things that came out. There are people willing to work for free with analytical degrees from MIT and Harvard and Yale because they want to get in the industry. That's not going to be your advantage. So we work on the concept that we try and influence those who undertake the change behaviours. And for every piece of analysis or analytics that we have, we try and be more efficient than everybody else in the world. So we always say about ourselves as a department, if you gave every international cricket department in the world the same data, we would outperform them because we would get more behaviour impact out of that data set. And for me it's important when you think about this concept of different levels of analytical capability that we understand where we're trying to impact within that organisation. The first level for me, which I think is hugely important, are the leaders. So in our organisation, that's Hugh Morris. He's our Managing Director of England Cricket. And essentially Hugh sets the strategies and the organisational structure. So if we really want to have a persevering impact upon how we go about playing their cricket, how we develop players and so on, we have to be able to impact right at the top level as the leaders. And that means using our analytical capabilities where possible to impact upon Hugh Morris, Chief Executives and so on, and their thought processes about what it is they're trying to build. Because remember that Hugh Morris is trying to build a team, an organisation which wins games of cricket and inspires the nation. So that is one of our very important points of contact in terms of influence. Coaches obviously massively important. They're probably our biggest client base. We probably work closest with the coaches on a day-to-day basis, because along with our selectors, they will impact upon the selection of players, how those players train, and what our competition culture and strategies are. And we tend to focus on two areas in terms of winning games of cricket and finding new potential. First one is putting the best players on the pitch possible at any given time. I think if you haven't got the best players on the pitch, it's going to be very hard to win a game of cricket, no matter how focused or smart you are with your playing strategies. Then the second one is what those players know and do when they're out on the field. So how can we influence strategy, thought processes and behaviour based on the analytics we generate. And the final one is the athletes, which is to do with their training and performance behaviours. But actually where a lot of the conversation, a lot of the thought is around the athletes, we probably look at it a little bit differently. We would focus on principally the coaches, and then our touring analysts would spend a lot of time influencing what the athletes do in terms of match strategy. For individuals such as myself, I would spend a lot of time influencing or trying to influence our overall management structure, our overall management boards, including things like coach education, because they are massively important in terms of right now, 1 year, 5 years, how we go about meeting our aims. And to generally wrap us up, I wanted to talk through some of the considerations I think are important to get to that point whereby you can take a piece of data or a piece of analysis or analytics and change it into behaviour. This is experiential as much as science, and it's the things I think are massively important in terms of trying to make that as efficient as possible. I think a lot of them have been touched upon today by speakers previously, but hopefully it'll be a refresher and a bringing together of some of the ideas which have been presented. The first one for me is a trust relationship. Yes, we deal in data, but ultimately, to get someone to change behaviour or consider the behaviours that they're showing already, or for them to be comfortable in confirming the behaviours they are showing or we're going to show, they need to trust you as much as what you put in front of them. And that's something I've learned over time, and I think science and the information out there tells us now that individuals aren't necessarily logical. So even though we build data models on sport that tell us logically this is the way to go, that doesn't mean that they're going to do it when you show it to them, because they can be working on a totally different plane to the logic that you've got on the paper. So you need to have that trust relationship. And the reality is, if you haven't got it, you either need to build it or you need to move on to another industry. Because if your aim, as ours is to get to level 5, you will not get to that point unless you build a trusting relationship. You will be the type of department who would sit there, would generate things, and as I used to hear when I started out, well, we've generated it, if they don't use it, well, it's not my fault. But you're not going to hit an aim, you're not going to hit a goal at that, and principally you couldn't work in the type of department that we're trying to build, and I know a lot of other sports and organisations are trying to build with that type of attitude. You've got to focus on trying to build these relationships. And a lot of time you spend an inordinate amount of time doing that, but once you get it, it opens up a large part of the filter to allow you to be effective moving forward. I think once you've got that, you've got a great foundation to actually move forward and start to generate those ideas. The second level, have you got a relevant topic? And I know this was touched upon a little bit earlier today, but relevance can be taken in many different forms. But actually, again, if you're trying to influence someone, they have to be able to buy into the topic that you're talking about. They have to have some kind of spark or link to the information that you're putting across. And again, we use the term interesting isn't an advantage. So when I started in cricket, you would get a lot of information generated that is interesting, potentially, but gives you no advantage in terms of how you're actually going to go about winning a game of cricket. So think about that in terms of the difference between what we would do as a performance analysis department and what you would do, and what you would hear sometimes on the TV about historical stats or just general findings and information. It makes no use to us at all in terms of winning games of cricket, but it's nice for the general cricket fans to know and understand, to tell a narrative about where the sport's going and what's going on. And again, I think once you've got that relevant topic, then you're at the stage where actually you want to think about how this is communicated, which Marco touched upon, Dave touched upon, and progress from there. Timing is a massive factor as well for us. So you can have the relationship, you can have the right topic, but if the timing is just a little bit too late or just a little bit too early, then it's not going to have the ultimate impact that it could have along the road. A great example for us of this is when we first started, a lot of the teams would go through a process whereby they'd be on tour, there'd be a game coming up. They would select a team, and then we'd give all the coaches and selectors information about where we're going. And then we'd get there, then they'd practice, and then there'd be a review before we play the game. about what the statistics are, what the general playing conditions are, then a break, night off, and then we go and play. And then we sit there and we're like, well, so we've got information that affects potentially who you select, whether you should play one spinner or two spinners, how many batsmen you might need, why are we feeding that in after the selection meeting's been? And then once we get to the game situation, why are we feeding in game tactics and game information strategy after the last practice before a game? So actually one of the things that we've been able to achieve over a period of time, which I'm most proud of, that has changed a few of the metrics, is changing the timing and how we feed information into our selectors, our coaches. So now all our information for selectors and tours goes in before selection panel, and we're lucky that we can have some influence over the presentation of that information. And then all our information about game situations, opposition, playing strategies for games goes before you practice. So actually you can take that out to the practice field, you can try and implement as much as possible, and then hopefully we'll have more impact as you're going forward. So if the time is not right, wait for the next best opportunity, or go about engineering it such that the opportunities are better for you to take. Once you've got that time, then you're into that process of actually being able to start presenting these ideas. And again, there's this concept of present it appropriately. I was a little bit stuck on the terms here because presentation thinks, or gets people to think about doing what I'm doing now, standing up, presenting information, talking about it. This is about how you actually take this idea that you put it on paper or your computer and bring it to life in a different environmental situation. So we found that some of the best ways of doing this, for example, with the players, is to create a game. So we would have a cycle where we may generate a statistic about where you want to bowl when you play in India, for example, or you play in the West Indies. I may have a conversation with the coach about it one way, and he might like it in numerical, or he may like it pictorially. Then when we get to the point of transferring that again to the players, between ourselves and the coach, we might actually create a game. So our coach likes to create a game whereby he will say, there's a target here, that's 10 points. There's a target further back, that's 15 points. There's a target this side, that's 5 points. Naturally competitive, the boys, they will bowl the targets where they're going to get the most points, and at certain times they'll get to get bonuses and so on. But those targets will be specifically placed based on where he wants them to bowl when they get to India or where they get to the West Indies. So he's not telling them and presenting them with paper and numbers the information they need to show. He's trying to create an opportunity where they immerse themselves in the behaviours that he wants them to learn and explore to take out into a field. So that's what I mean about presenting appropriately. It's the wider concept of how you take that information and turn it into something which someone else is going to absorb. So if it's not quite right, rethink it, redesign it, and then redo it if you've got the opportunity. If you've got it, this is what I call the idea of being live, because you've now put it out there. They've explored it in however they find suitable, but then it has to still go into behaviour. And I think there's still one stage more which you need to try and explore and build in to make the most of that. And I think that's next steps. So I would often previously put something out there, or we as a department would put something out there and then wait for the answers back, wait for the next steps all the time. And then what we realise sometimes is that actually we've thought about this for maybe 3 or 4 months. We've explored the idea, we've explored where it came from, what its possibilities are. So sometimes we need to give people possible next steps. Now that's different to telling a coach or an athlete what to do, but it could be, we've generated this analysis, it tells us this. The next really useful thing to confirm would be to do X, Y, or Z. And by giving them that next stage, it's almost like the next step. So, right, we found this out, this is the next step we're going to take. And often we find that by framing that, by painting some picture of the future of this information, people find it easier to relate to it and relate to what that might mean in terms of the behaviours that they could show afterwards. Because there is a big danger that these great ideas you generate could become a yes, but, so they don't see the vision of where it could go, because again that could still be trapped in your head, or a thanks. They actually think it's a good idea, they want to do something with it, but they haven't quite figured it out, and then time moves on. You know, sometimes we're talking about these ideas have a 10-minute lifespan. If they don't impact in that 10 minutes, they're out in the training field, and the impact of it is potentially gone. So let's just go back. So overall, it's getting late in the day. I can't click buttons anymore. So overall, if you get to this point, so you've been through, you've thought about the idea, you've found the right time, you've found the right way of delivering it, you've given next steps, then I think you're at that point where you've got a high probability of that information, that idea was generated first from data, transferring over and having a high probability of converting into a behaviour that someone confirms or changes or shows at the leadership, the coaching or the athlete level. And for me, this picture just captures that. This was a picture after the World T20 win a few years ago. Again, we don't always get them right as a group, generally, in this organisation. We don't always achieve that aim of inspiring a nation and winning games of cricket. But really, these three guys, our coach, our leader, Hugh Morris, and our captain in whatever form of the game may be, are our, as a department, key points of contact in trying to use our information to influence how they go about shaping the overall organisation's aims. Thank you.